Hello, I'm Sue Regan from the HC Coombs Policy Forum at the Crawford School of Public Policy. I'm interviewing Don Russell. Don was Secretary for the Department of Innovation, Industry, Science and Research. He took that post in 2011. His department took on climate change and tertiary education in his time there. Don was also a principal advisor for Keating when he was both Treasurer and Prime Minister. Don, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
You gave a speech at the ANU recently where you reflected on your time as departmental secretary. Could you tell us about what you saw as your main challenges during your time at the department?
Well, I mean, the challenges were manyfold. I guess in terms of coming back to Canberra, because I'd been away for a decade or more, what did strike me coming back to the department was the change in the relationships between the secretaries. The secretaries are now much more collegiate. There's much more discussion between secretaries. There's much more, I guess, coordination out of the Department of PM&C, out of the Secretary of the Prime Minister's Department. And that I found refreshing because in the old days there was a much more adversarial set of relationships that existed between departments and secretaries, so I thought that was all very good. But in terms of the department itself, what struck me there was that there had been a change of culture there. They were well and truly signed on to the notion that industry policy was innovation policy, and that they saw their main function trying to get the best out of Australian industry, rather than to sort of protect the dying and giving care to those who are on the way out. So they were probably the biggest changes.
You headed up a very large department, reporting to several ministers. Was that? Could you tell me a bit about how difficult that was, or whether you saw it as an opportunity?
I did end up with 4,000 employees and 23 divisions and 10 agencies, and at the end I had 5 ministers and 2 parliamentary secretaries. So it was a big job. But the real task was to try and define what it was all about, because it only made sense to have such a large department with so many responsibilities if you could make more of it than just the sum of the bits. And that was the major challenge, and having articulated to try and get the department to see themselves that way, and then to put into place sort of arrangements which made it happen. So it was a sort of leadership role, but it was also a management role, but not in the sense of micromanaging what everybody did, because with such a large body it would have been really quite counterproductive if the secretary signed off on every conceivable little piece of paper that went out of the department, because it would have sent the secretary mad, but it also would have been a very bad use of the secretary's time. So that was the challenge, and to get the sort of the vision of the department across to the 4,000 employees, and to get them up to the point where they actually could make sense of it.
What did you learn from your time with Keating that put you in good stead when you became a departmental secretary?
I guess it was a combination of things that I learnt. I guess I came away from that time with Paul Keating with the notion that good ideas drive out bad ideas, and that's certainly been my experience. And so I guess I brought a general optimistic view about the capacity of the public sector, of public officials, to deal with problems. I suppose from that time with Keating, I had a fairly good understanding of the importance of identifying the problem. That if you identify the problem, you're begging the question, what are you going to do about it? And if you identify the problems cleverly and you've got the capacity to do something about it, you can bring to bear a lot of resources, and you can actually solve problems. So I guess it was that experience that I've always sort of taken from my time with Keating.
I was struck in your speech at the ANU when you said that the the missing ingredient in policy advice today was imagination. But how do we help departments find their imagination?
Well, it is a challenge. I mean, it's not just a problem that besets the public sector institutions. I mean, large private sector bodies also have the same problem. I mean, it is what happens when you get lots of responsibilities, a lot of functions gathered in one institution. There is a sort of natural tendency for people to fall into silos, and it becomes more and more difficult for people to speak to each other across the silos. And in many cases, the imagination comes from being able to see things in a broader perspective rather than just in the narrow perspective of responsibilities. So imagination is a difficult thing in any organisation, and I think this is where I've sort of brought my sort of private sector experience to bear, is that a lot of the responsibility lies with the CEO, with the secretary in the departmental setup. It is really it's a leadership role. It's if the secretary or the CEO doesn't really want an imaginative, dynamic organisation, you can be absolutely certain he or she will get that in spades. So it's a task really for the senior management. The secretary really needs to put his or her effort into actually achieving it. So, which is why in my lecture I said that essentially it's only the secretaries that can save the Australian public service.
Are you optimistic they can?
Well, I think that's right, because I mean the task is clearly an important one. I mean the nation, the community has a lot of resources tied up in those departments. They're big institutions. I mean they should be capable of doing important, exciting things, and I think there has been for a long time a lot of attention given to what these departments can do. But I think hopefully what I was trying to do was to sort of narrow it down and make it the task of the secretary, because in reality it's only the secretary that can do it. But I think if we can create a generation of secretaries who are not risk averse, who really see it as their moment, because secretaries have a 5-year contract. It's long enough for them to plan, but long enough also to deliver. I think if we can make that the culture where people get the job and then they are expected and they want to actually do something with the department that they've got, and then be held to account for what they actually achieved. I think there's every reason to believe that we can achieve good things. I think it's unfortunate if secretaries see themselves as it's just going on. I mean, if you're appointed as a secretary in your 40s, I think it's probably unwise for the secretary to see themselves still as a secretary in their 60s. I think the notion that if you sort of do a good job, you don't make any mistakes, you leave the department in good shape, I don't think that has to be the criteria that we judge whether they should be reappointed. I think they should be there to achieve an outcome, and they should be expected to do great things in their tenure.
You mentioned that secretaries can be risk averse. Do you think governments in general are risk averse, and is that a bad thing, or? Well,
it's a very difficult thing. I used to tell the people in the department that part of the reason why the industry department or the innovation department kept on adding functions was because of our enviable record as a safe pair of hands. And no government, no minister wants departments who are flaky at the edges when it comes to handling public money or implementing programs. So I used to say to them, the entree into being an important department is that you actually have to be able to deliver programs. You have to be able to do these things efficiently and without making mistakes. So the real challenge for a department is to be able to do both, to be imaginative but at the same time be a safe pair of hands. So in that environment, it's extremely important that you have a range of managers who can do both. So it's got to be, it can't just be command and control, because if it's command and control, you don't have the capacity to be imaginative. But if it's just a lot of people thinking, then you can be reasonably certain that the program delivery is not going to tick along smoothly. So the management task in that environment is a difficult one, and which again means that the secretary has to put a lot of effort into encouraging people to not make mistakes, but to encourage people to also be imaginative. So it's a hard gig.
Yes. You also have, you talked about decision-making being dishevelled at times, with decisions being made in ministers' offices and with the public service sometimes as a bystander. Is there a better model and that we can aspire to?
Well, I mean, I guess that was, part of the change, I suppose, being away was there was, a political culture, and which has grown up in recent years, where more and more of decision making of the government has tended to emanate out of Parliament House, and in many cases, processes and decisions would be taken, without the sort of direct involvement or even knowledge of bureaucratic advice. And this did, surprise me to an extent, because it does, lead to dishevelled policy making. It does lead to governments not being able to achieve really what they're trying to do, because if you're making decisions without having the full regard for what is actually going on, or understanding fully the consequences of what you're doing, the government is in a position where it doesn't achieve what it's trying to achieve, and it's a sort of second-rate option. So again, it's in my speech I said a lot of the responsibilities lies with the secretaries, because advice now is contestable, and so we've got to create a structure where ministers want to seek the advice of their departments, not that they have to, but they actually want to, which means that, getting back to our earlier part of the conversation, departments have to be in a position where they can provide imaginative advice to ministers, and you need to create that virtuous circle where ministers are very pleased to have the department involved, because it makes them a better minister, and the departments are able to provide that sort of information, which enables them to be dealt into these situations.
What do you see personally as your biggest achievements when you were secretary, and if you could, perhaps something that you think you might have done differently?
Well, I think it was a challenge having to take on all those extra responsibilities as time went on, because taking on the full range of responsibilities for universities and TAFEs, skills apprentices, and then finally climate change was quite a big addition to the department. But I think probably the greatest accomplishment I made, I think, was that the department was able to, I think, convince people that it actually made sense, that the model that was being established, having the skills and research and science all in with the industry department, was working, and that it was a model that did enable the government to be in a position to talk about economic transformation. And it is really the big challenge that this country faces, with the extraordinary changes in the industrial structure of this place, that we do need to make the best use of our universities and our science and our research, and make sure that we are being able to commercialise that in a sensible way, and having it all together in one department, which is also responsible for schools, made sense. And I think we had a measure of success, convincing central agencies that this was a sensible model, and so I'm hoping that over time we will gravitate to a structure which does make best sense of what happens here in Canberra.
Good. Don, I think that's all we have time for. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.